The scalp weeps. One eye is already gone. There is only the cloying scent of a man rotting from the inside out. It wasn't a panzer that broke him. It was a single rose thorn. A global empire currently forging 10,000 Spitfires is being defeated by a gardening accident. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a tactical suicide. How did the yellow magic, the cure for death itself, collapse because it was trapped in the walls of a common bedpan? The Oxford elite claimed mass production was impossible. They chose the manual over the miracle. But while the experts debated in wood-paneled halls, a woman the world ignored was already in the dark, turning a kitchen experiment into a river of life. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog, lost in the dust of time. September 1941, Oxford, England. The air in the infirmary is thick. It carries the heavy scent of damp wool, cold stone, and the sweet, cloying rot of gangrene. In a bed that feels far too large for his shrinking frame, Albert Alexander is disappearing. He is 43 years old, a policeman, a father, and he is being eaten alive. It started with a rose. A single thorn pricked his face while he was gardening a microscopic entry point for a monster. Now his scalp is weeping with abscesses. His lungs are beginning to fail. One of his eyes has already been removed to stop the spread of the infection. In the 1940s, this is the natural order of things. Before the yellow magic, a scratched knee or a blistered heel wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a coin toss with the Reaper. In a nearby laboratory, Howard Florey and Ernst Chain are staring at a miracle they cannot hold. They have it the Penicillin mold. They have found the literal fire of Prometheus, a substance that can strip the teeth from a bacterial infection. To understand why Albert is dying while the cure sits 10 feet away, you have to understand the fatal flaw of the drug. Penicillin doesn't kill bacteria like a poison. It acts as a mechanical saboteur. Imagine a construction crew trying to build a brick wall, but someone has replaced the mortar with water. The bricks go up, but they cannot stick. Eventually, the pressure of the interior causes the entire structure to burst. Without its walls, the bacteria simply explode. The science is perfect, but the system is a tragedy. The Oxford team are not industrialists. They are a high-stakes kitchen. To harvest even a few milligrams of the drug, they have to grow the mold on the surface of a liquid broth. It is a slow, agonizing process that requires vast surface areas. Because the British government is obsessed with the steel and oil of the front lines, they offer no industrial support. They are fighting a war of machines, and they have no time for a mold juice that takes weeks to grow in a saucer. And so, the greatest medical breakthrough in human history is being brewed in bedpans, in milk bottles, in ceramic jars scavenged from university closets. They give Albert everything they have. Within 24 hours, the miracle happens. The fever breaks. The abscesses begin to heal. The dead man begins to breathe again. But the yellow magic is processed by the human body almost as fast as it is injected. To keep Albert alive, the scientists are forced to collect his urine every hour, rushing it back to the lab to extract and recycle the trace amounts of penicillin his body has discarded. They are trying to fill a leaking bucket with an eyedropper. By the 5th day, the supply is gone. Every bedpan has been scraped dry. Every bottle is empty. Without the medicine, the bacteria resume their construction. The mortar returns. The walls go back up. The infection returns with a vengeance. Albert Alexander dies because the most powerful empire on earth couldn't figure out how to grow a common mold in a way that mattered. The Oxford elite believe this is simply the limit of the possible. They have convinced themselves that the yellow magic is a boutique cure, a fragile breath of a miracle that can never be scaled to the magnitude of the coming war. They treat the silence of the empty vials as a final judgment. They claim that the mass production of penicillin was impossible because the mold was too temperamental for the factory floor. They prioritize the tradition of the laboratory, the Oxford way, over the radical engineering needed to save a generation. They were content to watch a man die in a bedpan because their manuals said the mold must breathe on the surface, and the surface was all they knew. But they had fatally underestimated the nature of the problem. They believed the solution lay in more bedpans, more ceramics, more of the same. They were looking at the surface of the liquid, blinded by their own academic status, while thousands of miles away, in the industrial heart of Brooklyn, a ghost was already moving through the shadows. While the Oxford boys fain were debating the limits of the possible in their wood-paneled halls, Margaret Hutchinson Rousseau was already in the dark, holding the silence that would save the world. She didn't see a fragile miracle. She saw a chemical engineering problem that the experts were too arrogant to solve. The generals and the scientists looked at the coming invasion of Europe, the millions of men who would soon be torn apart by lead and steel, and they saw a medical catastrophe they couldn't stop. They treated the impending death toll as a statistical inevitability. But as the clock ticked toward D-Day, the boss was about to arrive. Not a general, not a Nobel laureate, but a woman who understood that to save the surface, you have to go deep into the dark. 1943, Brooklyn, New York. The air here doesn't smell of damp stone or hospital rot. It smells of hot grease, burnt rubber, and the sharp metallic tang of a city that has been converted into a single, massive engine of war. This is the Pfizer plant. While the Oxford boys are still delicately tending to their ceramic jars like gardeners in a Victorian conservatory, the American industrial machine is screaming for a miracle. The generals have looked at the math of the coming invasion, and the math is a death sentence. They know that for every soldier killed by a German bullet, 2 more will likely die from the infections that follow. They don't need a few milligrams of yellow magic. They need tons of it. They need a river of life to offset the ocean of blood they are about to spill. But the establishment is stuck in the surface trap. They believe that because the Penicillin mold is a living, breathing fungus, it must sit on the surface of its food to survive. It needs the air. In their minds, you cannot grow this miracle in a deep vat any more than you can grow a forest at the bottom of a lake. To increase production, the experts believe you simply need more surface area, more bottles, more trays, more warehouses filled with millions of tiny, fragile glass containers. It is a logistical nightmare. It is slow, it is artisanal, and it is failing. Moving through the shadows of this massive clanking factory is a woman who shouldn't be there, Margaret Hutchinson Rousseau. She is the first woman to ever earn a PhD in chemical engineering from MIT. In a world of grease-stained coveralls and tobacco-spitting foremen, she is a ghost. She is highly educated, precise, and entirely invisible to the men who run the Fichten system. To the directors of the war effort, Margaret is a calculator in a skirt, a temporary necessity of a labor shortage. But Margaret isn't just calculating, she is reimagining the physics of survival. She walks past the rows of surface growth trays, her eyes fixed on the fundamental flaw of the Oxford method. She sees the deadly gap, the mechanical failure that the scientists have mistaken for a biological limit. The fatal flaw: the mold only grows where the liquid meets the air. If the liquid is 3 inches deep, the bottom 2 inches are a dead zone, wasted space where the mold cannot reach. It is like trying to feed a city using only the fruit that falls onto the sidewalk. You are ignoring the entire tree. Margaret realizes that if they stay on the surface, they will lose the war. The system is trying to build a skyscraper by laying bricks one by one on the ground. She wants to build vertically. She wants to go deep. She proposes a radical, terrifying idea: deep tank fermentation. She envisions 700-gallon steel vats filled to the brim with nutrient broth. She wants to submerge the mold entirely, forcing it to grow in the dark, churning depths of a pressurized tank. The reaction from the establishment is a wall of crystallized arrogance. A senior director, a man whose name has been preserved in the ledgers of Pfizer, but forgotten by history, leans across a mahogany desk. He doesn't look at her blueprints. He looks at her. "Dr. Rousseau," he says, the title tasting like an insult in his mouth. "This is a living organism, not a batch of synthetic dye. You are proposing to drown the only hope we have. The manual is clear. The mold needs the surface to breathe. If you submerge it, you kill it. We don't have time for your theoretical fluid dynamics. We have a war to win." He treats the manual as a holy text. He prioritizes the tradition of the laboratory over the terrifying reality of the front line. In his mind, Margaret is an outsider playing with forces she doesn't understand. But Margaret possesses the cognitive bridge. Because she is an outsider, because she is a chemical engineer and not a biologist, she doesn't see the mold as a temperamental pet. She sees it as a chemical reactor. She understands something the Oxford boys missed. The mold doesn't need the surface. It needs oxygen. While the experts saw complexity and biological fragility, Margaret saw a pattern. She realized that if you could find a way to pump sterilized air through the bottom of the tank and keep the liquid in a constant, violent state of agitation, the mold wouldn't drown. It would feast. She envisions a black box of engineering. Input: pressurized, sterile air and a rotating impeller. The mechanic: by spinning the liquid at high speeds while blasting air through it, you create millions of tiny bubbles. Each bubble acts as a miniature surface. Instead of one single surface at the top of a jar, you have created 1 trillion surfaces throughout the entire 700-gallon vat. Output: the mold thrives in 3 dimensions. Production doesn't just double, it explodes by a factor of hundreds, but the system is terrified. They believe her tanks will become death traps of contamination. One stray bacteria in a 700-gallon vat would ruin the entire batch, a loss of thousands of doses. They prefer the safety of the small bottle, even if that safety means 1 million soldiers will die from infected wounds. Margaret persists in the silence of the night shift. While the factory floor is loud with the panic of meeting impossible quotas, she is in the dark, refining the seals on her agitation shafts, ensuring that not a single microscopic invader can enter her steel cathedrals. She is the ghost in the machine, working on a solution the world doesn't yet know it needs. Margaret isn't waiting for a signature that will never come. She begins to divert, rerouting high-grade steel and industrial air compressors earmarked for proven surface growth warehouses. In the eyes of the War Production Board, this isn't innovation. It's industrial treason. If her fluid dynamics are off by a single percentage point, if the mold dies in those tanks, she won't just be fired. She will be prosecuted for sabotaging the Allied war effort. She is working in the dead of night, bypasses the official schematics, and forces the system into a gamble it never agreed to take. She is betting her life and the lives of 1 million soldiers on a theory the generals have already called a delusion. They treat the slow pace of the surface growth warehouses as an inevitable friction of war, but they have fatally underestimated the hammer that is about to fall. It is now late 1943. Across the Atlantic, the Great Crusade is being assembled. Millions of young men are boarding ships. They are being told they are the most well-equipped army in human history. They have the best tanks, the best planes, the best rifles. But they are carrying a hidden vulnerability. The system has promised them a miracle cure that, as of this moment, barely exists in enough quantity to treat a single battalion. The planners are toasting to their proven methods, ignoring the fact that their supply chain is a brittle glass pipe. They believe the ocean will respect their schedules. They are wrong. While they toast in the boardrooms, the boss, the raw, uncompromising reality of the coming slaughter, is preparing to remind them who is really in charge. The Oxford Way is about to meet a wall of casualties that will shatter every ceramic jar in England. The only thing standing between the Allied army and a medical apocalypse is a woman they refuse to acknowledge, standing in front of a 700-gallon steel tank, waiting for the first bubble of air to break the surface of the dark. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. The world is a cacophony of screaming metal and the heavy rhythmic thud of naval bombardment. The air is no longer air. It is a thick gray soup of salt spray, cordite, and the metallic scent of blood. As the ramps of the Higgins boats drop, thousands of young men stumble into the surf of Omaha and Juneau. They are walking into a storm of lead that treats human flesh like wet paper. In any other war in the history of our species, this would be a massacre of a different kind. For these men, the bullet is often just the beginning of the end. In the Great War, a survivable wound to the leg or the chest was a death sentence delayed by 3 days, the time it took for the inevitable infection to turn the blood to poison. But as these men crawl through the red tide of the shallows, they are carrying something the world has never seen. Tucked into their field kits, alongside their ammunition and their letters from home, is a small, unremarkable vial. It is a ghost in their pocket. It is the liquid legacy of a Brooklyn factory and a woman the generals tried to ignore. The yellow magic is no longer a miracle brewed in a bedpan. It is a flood. By the time the first wave of casualties reaches the tossing hospital ships, the system has finally been forced to accept Margaret's vision. Her deep tank fermentation units are no longer theoretical. They are the beating heart of the Allied medical machine. Because Margaret dared to look into the dark depths of the vat, the United States is now producing 100 billion units of penicillin every single month. The impact is visceral. It is immediate. A medic on the beach reaches into his bag. He finds a wound jagged with shrapnel and fouled by the oily sand of the coast. In 1914, he would have applied a clean bandage and a prayer. In 1944, he injects the deep tank miracle. The bacteria, the invisible army that has killed more soldiers than every general in history combined, find themselves hitting a wall they cannot breach. The robomortar of their cell walls fails. They burst, they die, the soldier lives. As the smoke clears over the hedgerows of France, the numbers tell a story that the history books often skip. The survival rate for wounded Allied soldiers reaches a staggering 95%. It is a feat of engineering that is every bit as decisive as the Enigma code or the atomic bomb, yet it doesn't hum with the same dark glamour of destruction. It is the quiet victory of a woman who taught the earth how to breathe under pressure. But victory, as history often reminds us, has a bitter aftertaste. 1945 arrives. The guns fall silent. The world gathers its breath and prepares to hand out the laurels. When the production reports from the deep tanks finally hit the desks of the War Department, there is no applause. There is only a chilling, shamed silence. The men who called her a theoretical dreamer now stand on the observation deck, looking down at the 700-gallon vats that did the impossible. They don't thank her. They don't look her in the eye. They simply take the clipboards, strike her name from the header, and begin to claim the deep tank method as an inevitability of American industrial might. The Oxford boys collect their Nobels in Stockholm, basking in a miracle they couldn't scale, while the woman who actually built the miracle is ushered out of the frame. The silence in that factory isn't peace. It's the sound of a theft in progress. She is not invited to the victory parades. As the industrial machine she perfected begins to pivot toward a world of peace, the woman who engineered the survival of an army is quietly relegated to a footnote of industrial history. The system she saved the male-dominated corridors of science and power has a very short memory for the outsiders who rescue it. She is moved back to the shadows of the laboratory, her PhD treated once again as a curiosity of the war years. The deep tank method becomes the global standard, the foundation of the modern pharmaceutical industry that keeps billions of us alive today. Every time you take an antibiotic, you are benefiting from the fluid dynamics of a woman whose name you were never taught. It is the cruelest irony of the human paradox. We obsess over the spark of the idea, but we ignore the engine that actually brings the light. We celebrate the man who found the seed, but we forget the woman who built the forest. Margaret Hutchinson Rousseau died in 2000, her name largely scrubbed from the monuments of the yellow magic. The system didn't learn from her, it simply absorbed her. Today, the pharmaceutical giants she helped create still hide their breakthroughs behind the same walls of bureaucracy and profit that almost killed Albert Alexander in a bedpan. We haven't outgrown the hubris of the Oxford boys. We've just given it a bigger budget. History isn't a straight line of progress. It's a circle of people in power staring at the surface. While the ghosts of the underdogs continue to do the heavy lifting in the dark. If you believe that stories like Margaret Hutchinson Rousseau's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing, like. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.